Hi everybody. This is a video about how to create a document flowchart. Before you do anything, stop this video and print off a copy of the narrative for Bloomington Boutique. This is the same narrative that we used in creating a data flow diagram. So I'll stop and wait for you to print off a copy. La 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 la. Oh, you're back. Here's the narrative for Bloomington Boutique, and you can use this to follow along with the steps in creating a document flowchart. Well, flowcharts come in all kinds of formats: system flowcharts, logic flowcharts, program flowcharts, but in this course we're going to focus on document flowcharts. Also, I'm just going to focus on a subset of the many symbols that are standard symbols for document flowcharts. And I've made a slide of the symbols that we'll use for the purposes of this course. There are process symbols, and there's two kinds. If it's a computer process, then represent that with a computer processing rectangle symbol. If it's a manual process, then you'll represent that with a trapezoid. A disk or computer storage file is represented by this cylinder symbol, and a paper file, which could be a file cabinet, a drawer in a desk, it could be a trash can even, is represented by the triangle symbol. Inputs and outputs, well, we're mainly dealing with document flowcharts, so this is the symbol for a document or a report. If you've got multiple copies of the same document, then depict it with overlapping document symbols with a number in the upper right-hand corner. This is a parallelogram, and accountants love to identify journals and any kind of ledger files or reports with a parallelogram. The last column, miscellaneous symbols. A circle is an on-page connector. This upside down house symbol is an off-page connector. And this last symbol here represents our external entities and agents. Here are the steps on how to create a document flowchart, and I'll read through these briefly. Step number 1, identify the external and the internal agents. Step number 2, identify the processes. Step number 3, identify the data stores and the tables and the files. Step number 4, create a column for each internal agent by drawing vertical lines down our piece of paper and then labeling the top of each column. Step number 5, draw the process steps in the sequence that they're performed on your diagram, and then also for each process, draw in the related inputs and the outputs. Step number 6, draw and connect the external agents, and these are sources and destinations for each document. So let's try this with Bloomington Boutique. First of all, we're going to draw a circle around every occurrence of an external agent. So far, this is exactly what we did in creating a data flow diagram. But I've added another part of this. I also want you to draw a circle around each internal agent now, and you only need to do this once. As with data flow diagrams, external agents are outside the boundary or the limits of our process, and they don't perform any information processing activities. So here is our narrative. Our 3 external agents are customers, bank, accountant, but we also have 2 internal agents now, the mail clerk and the cashier. Step number 2, identify the basic processes. And as with DFDs, basic processes are action verbs, and they have to do with some kind of an action related to a document or a data store. Examples are data entry, verification, classifying, and so on. Processes do not include interaction with products, just the data in the documents or the data stores. Again, as with DFDs, we're only going to include normal processes, no exceptions or error corrections. Include all and only processes described in the narrative. Don't make something up. As with data flow diagrams, the last part of this step is to group similar and related processes, but this time for each internal agent. So back to our narrative. Here are our external and internal agents, and I've identified 3 main processes. The first one is represented with the action verbs that are underlined in green: opens, keys, and updates. The second process is reconciles, and that's underlined with a yellow line. And then prepares, forwards, and sends is the third process, and they're underlined in blue. As with data flow diagrams, draw 2-sided rectangles around every file, table, data store, data repository. So here are our agents and our processes, and we have 2 data stores. One is the accounts receivable file, and the second is the customer sales subsidiary file. Step number 4. Draw a column for each internal agent and label it. So on a blank sheet of paper, draw a vertical line, and we'll have a label at the top of the left column, and it will be labeled with the first internal agent, mail department clerk, and the label on the right will be the back office cashier. Step number 5. For each internal agent, draw the process steps in the sequence in which they are performed from top to bottom in the column. And then for each process step, draw the input and the output that are performed with each step. Don't label the arrows again. So here's our example. I've got the 3 processes identified with the symbols that represent manual processes. Those are the trapezoid symbols here. First process step was performed by the mail department clerk. So I've got this in the left-hand column. The mail department clerk had checks and remittance advices as input to this process, but they're also output as well. So I've shown them both as inputs and outputs to the first process. But this first process also updated 2 files, and I've got them identified over here on the right. One with the disk file symbol, the other one, since it's an accounting file, it's identified here with the parallelogram. The 2 process symbols on the right are for the back office cashier, and they're written down in the sequence that these 2 processes are performed. The first process reconciles checks and remittance advices, and again we have remittance advices and checks as input and as output to this process. Third process, prepares deposit slip, has only one input, and that's the checks. And it has 2 outputs, checks and deposit slip. Now, I wanted to show that remittance advices and checks are outputs for the mail department clerk, but they're also both inputs over here for the back office cashier. And I've shown different ways that you can depict this. First way, if you have the remittance advice symbol over here on the left as an output, draw a line over here to the right and show it as the same document, and it is an input for the first process. I could have done the same thing for the checks document, but my lines might get crossed and I might make this very complicated. So an easier way of showing that there's a relationship here is to have the checks and a line going to an on-page connector. And when you're reading this, you should immediately look for the related on-page connector, and I can find that over here on the right-hand column, and this shows where that document goes to. Now, if I did this again with another on-page connector, then I would probably use the letter B inside the circle to show that that's a different connector. Step 6, draw and connect the external agents. And once again, external agents are the source and the destination of our documents. And here's our diagram. Customers are the source of the checks and the remittance advices. Accountants are the recipients of the remittance advices over here, and the bank is the recipient of checks and deposit slips. Guidelines for well-designed document flowcharts. Once again, just describe the normal course of operations. Don't deal with any exceptions or problems. Make sure that you show each document where it originates and its final disposition, if you know, if it is put in the narrative. As much as possible, the flows should go from top to bottom, left to right. Use the standard flow charting symbols, and we're just going to use that subset that I showed you in a previous slide. Clearly label all symbols. However, don't label any of the arrows. Arrows are just showing the flow of documents. Two common errors, and this is similar to data flow diagrams: don't create processes that have just inputs or just outputs. These are black holes and miracles. Every process should have at least one input and one output. On the left are errors. This shows data going from one report to another, and in this case, if you have something like that, make sure you've got a process between those two reports. If you have data going from one report to a computer, then make sure you have a process that shows how that data moves from the report to the computer. And in a similar case, data from a computer to a report, or a computer data store to another computer data store. Make sure you have processes that show how data is moved. Forwarding to another column, and I mentioned this in our example here. The only time that it is acceptable to connect two documents is when the document is being forwarded or sent from one column to another column. And in this case, make sure you've got the document identified in both locations with an arrow connecting them, showing that they are the same document. Now here's an exception. There's always an exception to every kind of rule and guideline. Here's an exception that says you don't need a process symbol when you are going to forward a document or file a document. And here is what you should do instead. If you've got a report that is being sent to somebody, just show it with the arrow that's going to the recipient. Likewise, if you got a report that's going into a desk drawer, you don't need a process, just show the desk drawer as a file and an arrow going to it. The rules for multiple copies of the same document mean that you should show them with the same symbol, one on top of the other, and make sure you have the document numbers in the upper right hand corner. So if you've got 5 copies of a document, for example, then you'd have 5 of these little document symbols, one on top of the other. On-page connectors, those are the circles with a letter in the center. I usually use these in order to avoid having lines cross each other or making the document look really complicated. Off-page connectors, when you've got a document flowchart that spreads over into several pages, this is how you would identify that the flow of the document is going from one page to the other page. So, to summarize, here are the 6 main steps to create a document flowchart. Number 1, identify both the external and the internal agents. Number 2, identify the processes. Number 3, identify the data stores and the tables and any computer files. Number 4, draw a vertical line on your sheet of paper so you have a column for each internal agent, and then label the top of each column. Number 5, draw in the process steps and their related inputs and outputs and connections with arrows. And number 6, draw and connect their external agents as sources and destinations of your documents or reports. So this sounds easy, doesn't it? Sure. Well, happy document flowcharting.